First of all, I would like to thank my co-authors in this paper, Victoria Murphy, who I see is looking at the ground and hoping that I won't point her out, but Victoria was a PhD student, and it's lovely to have her in the audience tonight because she really is the expert on this topic, and also Frances Lively. So really there are different options available for flooring for house beef cattle, and the challenge is really to find the right option that optimises animal performance, animal health and welfare, and also taking into account what the retailers want, and ultimately to optimise the profitability of the system. So one of the first things that Victoria did in her PhD was to survey finishing beef cattle throughout Northern Ireland to see what floor types are out there and what farmers' attitudes towards those floor types were. 62% of finishing beef farmers had more than one beef or had more than one floor type, and it'll come as no surprise that the most common floor type in finishing beef farms was slatted floors. So 72% had fully slatted concrete floors. 45% had a slatted floor covered with rubber, and 43% had solid floors with bedding, and the bedding was very much predominantly straw bedding. I don't think I need to discuss with this audience why slats are so popular in Northern Ireland in terms of them being a labour efficient and cost effective system for slurry management that don't require any regular cleaning out or bedding. This type of work has been going on now for a couple of decades, and this is an earlier study from about 20 years ago where we thought instead of us saying, well, I think that looks like a really comfortable floor, we put it over to the animals themselves, and we give bullocks a choice of what floors that they would like to stand and lie on. So the evidence came back very strongly that cattle prefer bedded floors to slatted floors. But what I really wanted to point out, when they were given a choice of slats or rubber, they had a very strong preference for rubber. So they spent 97% of their time on rubber when they had the choice, and in fact all of their time lying, so 100% of their lying time was on the rubber covered floors. So in terms of comparing slats and rubber, what else has the science told us? So there's a bit of conflict in evidence in the literature. Some studies have reported a lift in performance on cattle on rubber compared to slats, while others have found no difference in performance. And within these studies, there are a big range of commercial products. There are different genders of cattle being used in the studies. There are different diets being offered and different space allowances. The whole cleanliness issue between slats and rubber is perhaps more easily understood in that where the void between the slats has been decreased, then the cattle have been more dirty on rubber. Where the rubber has gone directly over the slat and there hasn't been much difference in the percentage of the void, there hasn't been much of an effect on cleanliness. There also have been quite a lot of European studies in this type of work. So intensive finishing systems where cattle are housed for their lifetime, and they have pointed out differences in lying and standing behaviours between cattle on slats and rubber. And also there has been some concern expressed that cattle on rubber have overgrown claws. So really our thinking behind the project that I want to talk about tonight is we have slats in Northern Ireland, and can we adapt the slats that are already in place in Northern Ireland to improve the welfare of finishing beef cattle? I'm going to talk about 3 studies tonight in that project, and all those studies use dairy origin bulls. The first study, all these cattle were out at grass from June to October, first of all. So again, different to those European type studies that wouldn't have had a grazing period. This study then was divided into a 100-day growing period and a 100-day finishing period, and we had 4 groups of cattle. The first group were on slats for both the growing and finishing period. The second group were on rubber for the growing and finishing period. The third group started off on slats for the growing period, and then they moved on to straw for the 100-day finishing period. And the final group then were on slats for the growing period and moved on to the rubber for the final 100-day period. The second study I wanted to talk about tonight is looking again at the effect of floor type, so it's slats versus rubber, but also looking at different space allowances. So, as you know, that cattle on solid floors with straw bedding are offered a higher space allowance, so we really wanted to try and tease out the effect of space allowance itself. And then the third study looked again slats versus rubber, but 2 different diets. So either an intensive diet where they were offered ad lib concentrates and straw, or a grass silage based diet where the concentrates were increased much more gradually, and then they were capped at 6 kilos per head per day. So then just to give you an overview of the results. In study 1, so this first column is the slats, this is the rubber, this is slats followed by straw, slats followed by rubber. So we did see some evidence of a lift on the two rubber treatments, but when we did statistics on this wasn't significant. The second study, we did start to see more evidence of a significant difference with a lift in performance on cattle on rubber. And incidentally, the space allowance had no effect on animal performance. And then in the third study, there really was quite clear evidence of this lift in performance in animals on rubber compared to the slats. And diet had much less of an effect on performance than the floor type. So we brought these 3 studies together and combined them in one big analysis. So that gives a really robust data set for statistics. And we then got significant differences. So we're confident that cattle on rubber have a better performance than cattle on slats. And this gave us an increase in 9 kilos of carcass. So that really, this is the figure that we're interested in because that's what we're getting paid for. There were no differences between the cattle on the slats and the rubber in terms of their carcass conformation or fat grades. So really, what does this mean in terms of pounds, shillings and pence? If we take this lift of 9 kilos and allocate £3 a kilo, which you can put in whatever you're getting for your grade of cattle, but in my simple maths, £3 was a very easy calculation. So that's given us a lift of £27. The cost of the rubber worked out at £100 a head. So that was the cost of laying the rubber was £45 per metre squared at a stocking density of 2.2 metres squared. So that gives us a payback time of between 3.5 and 4 years if we just have one crop of animals through that house in a year. So obviously that would decrease if you're putting through more animals in the year. In the studies that we carried out, the average length of time was 190 days. So there's potential if you have the setup to put more animals through than one crop a year. We're going to hear from our final speaker tonight, Dave, on the factors affecting meat quality. But in this study, the floor type had no effect on meat quality, so it seems that it is not one of the factors. We also were very interested in animal cleanliness, where throughout the 3 studies, we scored the animals from us. So each side of the animal was divided up, and then it was scored from 0 to 3, where 0 was very clean to 3 was very dirty. So they ended up with a total cleanliness score. I put this graph up. The dark grey is concrete slats, and the green is the rubber. The pattern of this graph was the same in all the studies, where cattle, whenever they were brought into the house, they got a lot dirtier, and then as the winter went on, as they lost their winter coat, they cleaned themselves up. So there was some evidence that the cattle on rubber were cleaner at time points throughout the study, but by the time we got to the end of the study, and certainly by slaughter, there was no effect of floor type on animal cleanliness. Same kind of pattern in this graph, and this is where we had slats versus rubber, and then in the finishing period we had the 4 treatments where the ones, one of the ones that were on slats then went on to straw, or else onto rubber. Again, we saw some evidence that these 2 treatments that were on rubber were cleaner at time points throughout the study, but again, by the time we got to slaughter, there was no effect of floor type on animal cleanliness. Then onto the sole bruising. So again, we were very interested in hoof health, and we found evidence again in all the studies that animals on rubber had lower sole bruising. I think what's very interesting from this graph is the cattle that were on slats and then moved either to straw or to rubber didn't get this decline in the probability of sole bruising in their hoofs. We also measured the net hoof growth of the animals, and there was evidence of a small increase in hoof growth of cattle kept on rubber. But we also looked at their locomotion score, so we looked at their walking gait, and there was no effect of the floor type on their locomotion score. Another thing that we looked at was their lying and standing behaviour. And what we found was that when cattle are standing on slats, they walk about much less than on rubber or straw. And also, when they're lying, they are getting up and down much less often on slats, so that they don't seem to have the confidence to get up and down as often. So then really, to summarise the key messages, we have evidence of improved performance of bulls when concrete slats are overlaid with rubber. No effect of floor type on carcass measurements or meat quality. We did see that rubber reduced hoof bruising and increased the toe growth, but not enough to affect any lameness or locomotion scores. Lying behaviours were certainly improved when we overlaid slats with rubber. So really, the rubber-covered slats were kind of like a halfway house. They certainly were a big improvement from the slats, but just not quite up to the standard of straw. But what I would say is that this was a very well-bedded straw system. As you know, Francis talked about growing grass in Northern Ireland. We have real good weather and soil conditions for growing grass, not so much for growing cereals. So only 3% of our agricultural land is in cereals. So that means that really we don't have enough straw to bed our cattle. In fact, we estimate we've about enough straw to bed about 20% of our cattle. And certainly in a badly bedded system like this, that's certainly not a high welfare system. So then really just the overall conclusion of this project is that rubber is potentially an economically viable option for finishing beef bulls in Northern Ireland to improve their welfare. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you.